Hi, I'm Erin. I'm APMP's content manager, and you're watching On the Record with APMP. Today, I'm joined by Patrick. It's nice to have you here, Patrick.
Thank you, Erin. I'm very excited to be here today.
Patrick is passionate about connecting the generations, and I would love to know, Patrick, what started this passion for you?
Well, for me personally, it was getting my first job out of college, and I'm still with that company today. So it's been 15 years that I've been with this company, and that role that I started with was a operational leadership people manager role. And I was very young, early 20s at the time, and the team that I was inheriting was much older than me, decades older than me in some situations. And I could tell right away that there was this attitude of, this young fella doesn't know how to manage us. He doesn't have enough experience to be in this role. And that kind of started my passion for connecting generations, because I found an employee business resource group at my company, and it was called iGen. And the sole purpose was kind of what I'm talking about today, bridging the gaps, connecting generations, helping people realize that the gap you think between the two farthest apart generations is actually a lot narrower than you think.
That's really interesting. And obviously, having been with this company for 15 years, you've gone from being the youngest person with a lot of older people to kind of transitioning up that ladder a little bit.
Absolutely.
How has that experience been?
It's been really rewarding, because part of what we do in our business resource group is we'll have an annual meeting and we'll get everyone together. We'll do breakout sessions. We have all the generations represented. And when I started doing that in 2009, I was the young generation just coming out of college, just starting to get these leadership roles. And I got to hear a lot of the perceptions of my generations from my colleagues. And now I'm an older generation, and I'm going to these events and I'm seeing Gen Z go through some of the same struggles that I went through, getting some of the same things said about them that were said about me. But now I'm in an opportunity as a leader to be able to help them feel more welcome, make it more inclusive for them, and help leaders that are my age and older learn how to work with the younger generation and leverage those strengths to build better teams.
Great. And you mentioned before how the gaps are much smaller than we think. But what are some of the gaps that you typically see between generations?
I think what you see is there's an immediate focus on the differences in things like technology, being able to easily use technology. There's a joke out there that millennials are the only generation that had to teach their parents how to use a printer and now have to teach their kids how to use a printer, because we're kind of that bridge generation between a lot of technology. But when you get past technology and some of the things that are out of our control, you know, these are things that are just happen during the time that you're alive, and you start looking at insecurities about jobs or finding a partner or owning a home by a certain age and starting a family, those are not unique anxieties to any one generation. And so when you take the focus away from some of the things like technology, which is starkly different depending on when you were born, you start to realize that a lot of the fears, the anxieties, and the things that the younger generation is going through now are very similar to what you yourself have gone through.
Absolutely. And even if we look at technology, there's always been technological innovations, and there's always been, like if you look at the Industrial Revolution, for example, like there's always been that thing that seems to set one generation apart from the other. But you're saying that there actually is a lot more similarities than we think, and I think that's very valuable for us to recognize. Do you find that people in organizations struggle to come to see those similarities on their own?
I do, and I've seen it firsthand, and I think it's almost a knee-jerk reaction to something that's different. And that's a human quality, you know, to fear the unknown or to push back against change. The world is going to continue to change, as you said, whether it's technology or anything else, it's going to continue to move. And you have to get people past that first impression. You have to get past those assumptions, and you have to get past the generalities or the generalizations that are put on each generation. But I find that once you do that, once you crack that door, it's almost like you're opening the floodgates, and it's coming out, and now people are talking and they're having a conversation. And that's what you need to have happen. That's how you build a winning culture. You have to have open communication, you have to have understanding, And you don't really do that until you get past those preconceived notions and kind of get down to the core of, why are you nervous about this generation? Why are you worried about this generation? Was that you 20 years ago? Were you as worried about yourself as you are about this generation? And it starts people thinking, and if you're very lucky, you can see in someone's face when that light bulb goes off, and you know that they've just, oh my gosh, I've never thought of it that way before. And so what I'm really excited about at the conference this year is the opportunity to present in front of a crowd and hopefully see some of those light bulbs go off.
Absolutely. And you'll be presenting to probably an intergenerational room as well, so it's going to be very interesting. So you mentioned there about cracking the door open. What do you think is really the first step we take to crack that door open?
I think it's almost incumbent on the leaders to realize they're the ones steering the ship. And they need to start those conversations. And one of the things that I talk about in my presentation is there's a joke about Gen Z not knowing what a landline is or how to use a landline, something that older generations are accustomed to. It's on the desk. It's still on the desk in many workplaces. And as a leader, you have a choice. You can roll your eyes and say, this generation doesn't even know what a landline is. Or you can take 5 minutes when you're onboarding that new hire, walk over and say, hey, have you ever used this before? We're going to have clients calling, things like that. Just want to make sure you're comfortable with it. And you take those 5 minutes. And what you get from that 5 minutes, instead of rolling your eyes, instead of being resentful about this young generation that doesn't know anything, you've started to build loyalty between you and that new hire, because they realize that you're looking out for their best interest, and they now want to go to bat for you. They want to teach you. Maybe you can't convert a PDF, whatever it is, maybe they can jump in and help you, and now you're bridging that gap, and it's going both ways. It's reciprocal, and that's how you start building that winning culture, and then it just becomes part of your everyday standard operating procedure with your team.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you were to give your top tips for keeping this going once you've cracked the door open and keeping this a very intentional process of connecting these generations in a workplace, what would you say?
I think the number one thing is remind yourself that it was not that long ago that you were in the same position that this younger generation is. And if you can take the time to realize that and notice that, wow, that's really true, it changes the way you perceive behavior. It changes how you react to behavior. So that's huge, being able to do that. And it's having that open communication with team members, not being afraid to talk about it. There's also some fear. You know, words like millennial and boomer can be used in a negative way, and it can be off-putting to people. So you want to have conversations about generations and differences, but you want to be respectful about it. And so if you're keeping an open mind, reminding yourself that you were just like that at one point in your life, you were just starting out, and then you make sure that you're intentionally having that conversation in a positive way, that's when you start to build that winning culture.
Great. What about the other way? Do you ever see that like younger generations can struggle with connecting with older generations and maybe the judgment in that direction?
Absolutely, absolutely. I touched on it a little bit earlier when I gave the example of teaching a Gen Z how to use a landline. And so, like I said, the same can go the other way. I can't tell you how many times someone much higher in my company, certainly making much more money than me, has to email or contact me asking to do something like converting a PDF. And it's the same, you have the same point if you're the Gen Z person in that situation. You have the same choice. You can roll your eyes and say, the old generation can't even do this, it takes 1 minute, come on. Probably not the best choice for building winning culture. Or you can say, hey, I don't have a problem converting that for you. I can have it for you in a few minutes. But if you've got a minute, you want to jump on a call, I can actually show you how to do that. You never have to ask anybody to do it again. And again, you're building that trust. The younger generation's not rolling its eyes at me. It's not making fun of me for not knowing how to do something. It's actually teaching me. And that's where you can get into what I think is a great way to connect generations, and that's reciprocal mentoring. We think of mentoring in a traditional sense of older employee, older employee shows a younger person how to do it. But when you take the idea of reciprocal mentoring, now it's a back and forth. Now it's an exchange of ideas, an exchange of experience, an exchange of skills. And now they're both benefiting. And that's huge. And I think that's something that any company can adopt, a reciprocal mentoring program, and it's only going to help build your team.
Yeah. And if we're talking about things like proposals as well, that something that involves business acumen but also creativity, the idea of having multiple generations contributing, there will be gold and less gold in both, and finding the middle ground through that collaboration is probably the ideal scenario.
I think that's a great question, and it's one of the topics I talk about in my presentation, is how I give the example of starting an RFP process. And you know you're going to bid on this, and you're starting to build that foundation of what your response is going to be, what are your win themes, how are we going to win this business? And if you've got a member of each generation that is on your team, they're going to go at that in very different ways. And you may have some baby boomers on your team with years and years of experience. They might immediately pick up the phone because they remember somebody they worked with at that company that might be able to give them some insight into their values, what they're looking for, and that is gold, you know. And then you might have your millennials and Gen X doing their internet research. They're on Google, they're looking up the company, they're finding out this company's mission, values, initiatives, and they're coming to the table with a hand-in-glove plan on how our features and benefits can go hand in hand with those initiatives and missions and values of the company. But then we've got our Gen Z, and these are our digital natives. They're born into it. They're going to start going on social media, and they're going to find all the accounts that are for this company. They're going to see what they're posting, what they're talking about. But they're really going to dive down into the comments. And when they get into the comments, that's when they're going to find out what the real hot button issues are. The ones that the C-suite may not be aware of or may not talk about. You know, you may do a Q&A with the client and they tell you that they want transparency and reporting and they want the lowest price point and that those are their biggest pain issues. But what your Gen Z might have just uncovered is that there's some underlying customer service issues here, and we've got programs for that. We've got an offer that can fix that. So let's weave that in with our win themes. Let's make it part of our red thread to say, yes, we're going to give you transparent reporting. We're going to give you the best possible pricing. But here's something else that we're also going to give you. And you weave that through, and now you've got a complete package of a winning proposal. And you only got it because you had 4 distinct generations in there helping you build that foundation.
So you are presenting at BBC Nashville on this topic. Is there anything else really valuable from your presentation today that perhaps the viewers who are not able to attend need to know?
I think this is a great question, and I appreciate doing it in this format because I know there won't be any spoilers for later today. Yeah. But one of the things that I do in my presentation is I present to the audience clippings or quotes that have been pulled out of magazines. And I don't tell them when the magazine's from, and I don't tell them what generation this magazine is talking about. And I put the quotes up on the screen and I read them, and every one of them is full of all the buzzwords you hear. Entitlement, lazy, can't buy a house, what have you, everything you've heard. And so I go through and then I put it to the audience. What generation do you think they're talking about? And usually with the first one, I'd say 75% of the crowd says that's got to be millennials. You're talking about millennials. And I click the button, and this is from Time Magazine, 1986, talking about the baby boomers. Yeah. And you get the, oh, and the look around. And then I go to the next slide. Same format. I've got quotes, but I don't tell them who it's about and where it's from. And I read them through, and wouldn't you know it, a lot of the quotes are pretty similar. A lot of the buzzwords are pretty similar. I ask them again who it is. Everybody kind of guesses. I click that button. 4 years later in Time Magazine, 1990, this was about Gen X. They were struggling to buy a house. They were struggling getting away from their parents. All the same things that we just heard in the article about the baby boomers. And then we go to the third slide and you do it again. And this time it's actually about the millennials. But when you get to the end of the 3 slides, you realize we've been saying the same thing about every generation, every 15 years. Yeah. And when you have that realization, then you know we're not as different as we think we really are.
No, absolutely. And I do think that age comes into play there, because when you're young, you think everybody that's 5 years older than you is ancient. Mm-hmm. And when you're a bit older, you think that everybody that's 5 years younger than you is an infant. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to remember that for older people, it wasn't that long ago that you were there, as you said earlier, but for younger people, it won't be that long until you're there either. And we're all you know, we're all on the same path.
It is very easy to forget what it was like when you were younger, when you
Yeah.
are now in a position of leadership. But it's very important to remember that.
Absolutely. It's just empathy, I suppose, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Patrick.
No, I appreciate it. It's been an honor.
Yeah, it was great to have you here. If you look in front of you, you will see that you have a souvenir token from
Yeah.
being one of the first on the record guests, and that is yours to keep.
That is wonderful, and I will display it. I work from home, so I'm remote. I'll display it in the background, so when I get on camera, everybody can say, "What's that gold mic for?" And I can tell them, "On the record,
Yeah.
APMP TV."
Perfect. Well, you know, I'm going to call you in a while just to check.
Absolutely.
If it's not there, I will
Front
be
and
very
center.
upset.
Let's go on a